Hello, I'm Helen Bradley. Welcome to this video tutorial. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how you can do a simple cupcake illustration that's going to introduce some really interesting techniques in Illustrator. Before we get started with this tutorial, let's have a look and see what it is that we're trying to achieve. We're going to create a cupcake design like this, and there are a number of interesting techniques that we're going to use. One of them is in creating the base of the cupcake and how we actually shape it without spending a lot of time creating the elements that go into it. And then we're going to look at shading around the edge of this cupcake icing as well, and creating the cherry and the background, and there's also a texture in the background here that we're going to use. So let's get started. To get started with our cupcake, we're going to first create a rectangle, and it's going to be a filled rectangle with no stroke. We're going to fill it with the sort of chocolate brown color that we're going to use for the base of the cupcake. I'm going to select it using the selection tool and then Alt or Option drag a duplicate of this shape away. I'm going to line these two shapes up and make the second one a lot narrower than the first. And I'm going to alternate colors here, so I'm going to choose another brown, a sort of lighter brown color, to be the alternating color. And now I'm going to select both these shapes and again Alt drag. If I were on the Mac, I'd be using Option drag. And I'm just going to line these up. Now, if I don't get them perfectly lined up, I'm going to move them back because I do want them overlapping each other. I don't want any gaps. I'm going to select everything, Alt or Option drag. Now, if you don't get them perfectly lined up, I'm going to show you what to do. So I'm going to do mine imperfectly. Select all of them. Again, Alt drag, making sure there are no gaps. And lastly, I'm going to select a smaller quantity of these and just line them up here. I want to finish with a thick edge to match the other side. Now these aren't nicely lined, so I'm going to select them, make sure that I have Align to Selection selected, and I'll just click here, Vertical Align Top. And that will make sure that they're all nicely aligned at the top. I'm going to group these, selecting them all, and choose Object Group. That has a couple of advantages. One, it allows me to move them all as a single object and also scale them all as a single object, but it also lets me go ahead now and warp them. I'm going to select over them and choose Effect and then Warp. And I want to use the bulge. Now for my initial warp, I want a vertical warp, so I want it to be a very small vertical, and I want a little bit of vertical distortion as well. So I want it to be a little bit sort of bowed out at the edges, so I'll just click OK. And now I'm going to apply a second warp to it. I couldn't have done both these warps together. I have to do it twice, and I'll show you in a minute. Effect, Warp, and again I'm going for the same bulge. I'm going to apply a new effect, and this time I'm going to choose a horizontal, and you can see I couldn't actually apply both a horizontal and a vertical at the same time, so I'm just going to set my horizontal to around 7 or 8 because I want the bottom of this to sort of billow out. If I don't select the right style, I can always change my style by just selecting a different one in the list and click OK. Now, this is the base of my cupcake, so I'm just going to size it down a little bit, holding Shift as I do to constrain it in its proportions. I'm concerned about 3 sides, not the top, because the top is going to be covered with our icing. So now let's go and lock this down. I think that's probably going to be easier. In the Layers palette, I'm just locking this group so that now I can't select it and I can't move it, and it's just going to stay where it's put. I'm going to select a color for my icing, so I'm going to choose a pale pink this time and choose the ellipse tool. Now I want something as sort of approximately a circle but not exactly a circle. I want it to be a little bit flatter. And this is going to be the icing on my cupcake, and I'm going to line it up pretty much over the top of that base shape. Now I want to add the circles of icing around there, and there are 5 of them. So again, I'm going to the ellipse tool. This time I'm going to hold the Shift key as I drag out a circle. It wants to be about that sort of size. And I'm going to drag it down here and I'm going to align it to the very middle of this cupcake icing. So I'm looking for this intersection and this center alignment to appear. I'm just going to let go of it once I have it in position. Now I'm going to Alt drag to create two more, and I'm going to place one each here and here. And then I'm going to add another one in between. So again, Alt drag and just position this one on the edge but between the other two, and Alt drag again. And now when I select these holding the Shift key as I click over them, just looking to see that the overlap is pretty consistent all the way around. If that's there, that's all I need. This is just a illustrative cupcake. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be pretty near. And I'm going to Shift click on the icing piece, so I've got all 5 circles and the icing all selected. I'm going to make them one shape by choosing Window and then clicking on the Pathfinder. I'm going to just drag my Pathfinder palette back onto this screen, and I want to click Unite because I want to add all these 6 shapes together and make a single shape out of them. So there is our icing shape. It has no dimension to it though, so we're going to add a bit of dimension. I'm going to do that by selecting on this shape, and I'm going to choose Effect and then Stylize, and I'm going to choose Inner Glow. Because inner glows don't have to be light, they can be dark. I'm going to click here to select a color, and I'm going to my color swatches, and I'm actually going to go down and pick pretty much the same color as I've used for my icing. It's this one here. And now if I set the blend mode to multiply, we'll actually darken the edges of the shape. I'm going to turn preview on so we can see what we're doing, and I'm going to increase the blur amount because that's going to bring the shading in around the edges of the cupcake. And just shading with the same color as we've used for the cupcake is just a really good idea because we know it's going to match, and it's going to be subtle enough to be visible but without being totally in your face. And of course we want edge because we want the shading to be around the edge. And I'll click OK and just click away, and you can see the shading has been applied. Now we can lock that icing down for a minute. Let's go back to our cupcake and let's do the same thing with it. I'm just going to select on that combined shape, and here it is. We're going to click on this group, and I'm going to apply my effect to it. So I'm going to choose Effect, Stylize, Inner Glow. And for this we're going to go and get the brown color that we were using. So again, I'll go to my color swatches. I'm going to locate that sort of chocolate brown color that we were using. And this is it here, so I'm just going to click on it. I'm going to turn preview on, and you can see that even though the shape is shown as this rectangle here, the shading is being applied to the curved shape. That's exactly as it should be. Now I don't want to be quite so heavy with my blur here. I want it to be a little bit smaller around the edges here because we're working with a dark color. Multiply blend mode and just click OK. And now you can see that we've got a sort of shading around the base of the cupcake. I'm going to lock that back again. Now let's make the sprinkles. The sprinkles are just going to be a small rounded rectangle, so I'm just going to drag out here a sprinkle, and I think I'm just going to use chocolate sprinkles this time, exactly the same color as the base cake. So I've got a single chocolate sprinkle here. I'm just going to drag and drop it into position, and then I'm going to Alt drag to create more of them. Now I could do this with a symbol, I could do it with a whole lot of things, but you know, there's not that many sprinkles on this cake, and I'm going to get a little bit better control of them if I just create them by hand. Now the trick with these is when you're trying to rotate them is don't rotate them a lot. I'm just going to knock this round a little bit, provided they're just at a slight angle. They're going to look appropriate. If you try and make them all sorts of angles, it's going to look a little bit like a dog's breakfast. So we're just going to rotate these very, very slightly. Enough that it doesn't look like a mistake that they're just on a small angle, but not so much that they're all over the place. And if you see that you haven't got quite enough sprinkles, by the time you've finished rotating them, you could just pick up one that is rotated in an appropriate direction and just drag it somewhere else with the Alt key to position it. So you can create a few additional ones if you need to. I might just move a couple around here. But I think that you'll just find this easier than messing around with the symbol sprayer or a scatter brush, for example. Okay, so there are our sprinkles. Now, I've got a lot of sprinkles here, so I'm just going to group all of these. I'm going to click on the first one and then hold Shift as I click on each other of these. Just going to make these into a group. It's just going to make them a little bit easier to manage in this panel, Object Group. And we can then lock that group down. We're ready to go ahead now and create the cherry and then create the backing for our cupcake illustration. So our cherry is going to be a circle. I'm just going to drag out a circle here, and I'm going to fill it with one of the colors that I'm going to be using. I think something probably like this red. And then I'm going to hold the Shift key as I drag a second version of the circle away from the first. And I'm just going to fill that with a different color so that you can see that we've got two circles here. And now I want to just put one of these aside as well, so I'm just going to Alt drag a third copy away. I'm going to focus on these two because I want to get a portion of this circle that I can use as the shading. So with these two selected, I'm just going to click on Divide, and that will divide them into pieces, and then I'll choose Object Ungroup, because that will ungroup them into the three component parts. So I've got a red highlight, a yellow middle bit, and another yellow highlight. So I can use either of these highlights, it doesn't matter which. I'm going to take this one. So I'm just going to refill this shape with red, and I'm going to size this highlight down a little bit, just Shift drag on it and place it in position over my cherry. And it's going to have a lighter fill, but you can see I'm having a bit of trouble selecting it, and the reason for that is it's below the cherry itself in the layers palette. So I'm just going to grab the piece and just put it above the cherry, because that's going to make life a little bit easier. And I'm going to fill it with the exact same color, so I'm going to target it here and fill it with the same red. And now we're going to go to Effect, Stylize, and again we're going to Inner Glow, but this time I'm going to select Screen as my inner glow, and I'm going to apply it to the center and click Preview. And I'm just going to select a slightly lighter version of this color. And if I drag down the blur amount, just decrease that, the smaller the blur amount, the more this is becoming a highlight on my cherry. Now I've probably gone a little bit too far there. I'll probably just set that to 4 and click OK. And now we have a cherry with a subtle highlight on it. Just going to grab the two pieces and drag it into position. If necessary, I can just rotate it as well. I'll probably want to group these two pieces so that they travel together, so I'll choose Object Group. And now let's add the stalk to our cherry, and we can do that using the pen tool. And if you're not really happy with using the pen tool, this is a really good time to get a little bit of practice with it, because you really can't make a mistake. I'm going to create a stroke but no fill, so I'm just going to make sure that I have stroke selected here, and I'm going to choose a sort of palish green to go with the rest of my cupcakes. I think that's sort of a good green color. I'm going to click and drag in a sort of upwards direction here, and then just click and drag on my cherry, and that's all I need for my shape. I'm going back to my selection tool, going back to selecting on the stroke because I want to be able to adjust the width of this line. So I've got my appearance panel here, which you can get to by choosing Window Appearance. Find it really handy to use that because when I've got things like this happening and I'm not seeing my stroke option, well, I can come straight in here and start adjusting the stroke even though I don't have the correct tool selected. So I don't want this to be very wide at all, probably about 13 points is good. I also want it to have a rounded end, so I'm just going to give it a round cap. Now this line can be placed in a minute behind the cherry, but let's add a slight shading to it. So I'm going to select the line and choose Object, Expand. And I just want to expand the stroke. And that just makes a shape. And I'll choose Effect, Stylize, Inner Glow. And I'm going to reselect this time my green color. It's here. Click OK. I want to make this multiply and I want it to be on the edge, of course, and I just want it to be a small-ish effect. So I'm going to set it to about 6 points and click OK. And I can move this behind the cherry by just grabbing its group and just dragging it behind the cherry. And we're going to add a leaf, and our leaf is going to be an ellipse. So I'm going to click on the ellipse. I've still got the same fill color. I'm just going to drag out a narrow oval. I'm going to click here on the anchor point tool and then just click once on this top point, and that just makes it a sort of leaf shape. Now I can go further with the direct selection tool and just reshape my leaf if I wish to. Maybe just bringing in the sides and making it a little bit more leaf shape. But as I said, that's a good practice for using the pen tool and for using the direct selection tool. If you're not really happy with using them, you really can't go far wrong with using them for this particular object. I'm just going to place my leaf in position, and because everything else has a sort of shading attached to it, we need to add it to the leaf. Effect, Stylize, Inner Glow. We're still using the same color as before and obviously want an edge effect here too. I'm just going to make the blur a little bit larger and click OK. Just make my cherry leaf attached to the leaf of the plant, and let's go down and let's just drop the cherry leaf into the group that has the rest of the stalk in it. Now I added a glow to this shape here, but I haven't yet added a glow to my cherry itself, so I'm going to click on the cherry. Let's make sure here that I just have the cherry selected, not the highlight, and I'm going to add a shading for it. So again, Effect, Stylize, Inner Glow. We're going to go and pick up the red color that we used for the cherry, and that's this color here. Click OK. I want to preview it. I want to make sure it's on the edge. We may want to blur it for something like about a 14-point blur and click OK. Now I'm thinking my icing is a little bit high, so I'm going back to this layer here, back to this path. I'm going to select it. I'm just going to squeeze it down a little bit and then just bring these two shapes down into position. So now we're ready to create the background. I'm going to lock everything else down so that nothing can move. I'm going to add a new layer to the image and just drag it beneath all the other objects so it's at the very bottom. I'm going to create a large ellipse on this, so I'm just going to drag out a really big ellipse shape and just move it down into position here. Now I don't want it to be filled with pink. I'm just going to go and select a color that I'm going to use for it. I'm going to remove the stroke so it's just a fill color. I'll press Ctrl 0 to bring everything back in the center here. Now I'd like to crop this to the artboard, so I'm going to create a rectangle here that is the size of the artboard. Now I could do this using a script, and I usually do, but today I'm just going to drag it out by hand. So here is my rectangle the size of the artboard. Now I want two of these. So having actually created one, I'm going to duplicate it and make a second one and turn the second one off. I don't want its visibility to be showing. And I want to click on this path and I'm going to fill it with a totally different color. Well, let's just do just that. So now I have a green rectangle and a blue filled ellipse. So I'm going to select both of these shapes, and what I want to do is I want to cut the ellipse to the shape of this rectangle. So I'm just going to click here on the crop tool, and what the crop tool does is it says cut out a piece the shape of this topmost piece. So we're using the rectangle as the cutting implement, if you like, and we're cutting it out of the ellipse. So I'm just going to click here. That's a nice easy way to get our ellipse cut to size. Now I want to add the shading to this shape as well, so I'm just going to open this up and let's just target this path. This is the path that I want. I'm just going to put the blue color somewhere where I can find it in a minute. Just going to stick it there, and let's go and choose Effect, Stylize, Inner Glow. Again, I'm going to go and find my color. It's in the color swatches, and I know it's after the grays. It's this one here. Just click OK. Preview, make sure it's on the edge, make sure the size is right, which it is, and just click OK. Now I've got a leftover path here, and I can just drag that out and ditch it because I don't need it any longer, and I can move this path up and get rid of the group. It's just tidying up the layers palette a little bit. I'm going to lock down that shape, and let's just go and get this blue shape because I want to fill this background rectangle with a different color. So I'm going to target the fill color, and let's just go and get a different color. Well, let's select the shape first and add in a different color. And I'm going to add a pattern to this, so I'm going for the appearance panel and I'm going to click here to add a new fill, and I'm going to go and find a fill to use. So I'm just going to open the flyout menu on the swatches panel and go and get my patterns, and I want a foliage pattern. So I'm just going to locate a pattern here that I can use. So these are patterns that ship with Illustrator. And this is obviously way too much of a pattern, but if I come in here and mess with the opacity, for example, just go for screen, or perhaps use something like soft light, then I can blend the pattern into the background. I'm actually going to reduce the opacity of this layer a little bit as well. And I'm going to finish off with a shadow underneath the cupcake. So for that, I'm going to select and create an ellipse. And I want to fill this with a gradient fill, so I'm going to click on gradient fill here, and I want to use the same blue as I've used for the base. So I'm just going to drag in this blue here, and I'm going to drag it in also to this end here, but then I'm going to darken it. So I'm just going to double click on this, and I'm going to choose HSB because that allows me to just decrease the brightness of this so I can create a darker version of the blue background here as my gradient fill. Now I want my gradient to be radial, so it's a circular gradient, and it looks like the light's in the middle and the dark's on the edge. Well, I want that to be reversed, so I'm just going to click to reverse the gradient. Now, if we would have a look at this gradient, it would be round even though the shape is a ellipse or an oval. So I'm going to target the gradient tool here so that we can have a look at this gradient, and you can see that it's a round gradient. Well, all I need to do is to grab this handle here and just shrink it in, and that will make it now an oval gradient. And I think it needs to be a little bit wider. I really want it to fill this shape. And now I'm just going to tuck it in behind here. I want to make sure that it is on a layer below the cupcake but above this blue background, and it's gone exactly into position. And if it hadn't gone exactly into position, then I just would have moved it into position. And this is our finished illustration. We've created this using basic shapes in Illustrator and added a shaded edge effect to the various pieces in our illustration using an inner glow effect. I'm Helen Bradley. Thank you for joining me for this Illustrator video tutorial. Look out for more of my video tutorials here on my YouTube channel, and consider subscribing to my channel and you'll be alerted when new videos are released. And visit my website at projectwoman.com, where you'll find more tips, tricks and tutorials on a range of applications including Photoshop, Lightroom, Illustrator and a whole lot more.